The hunting horn is a musical instrument that you use to smack monsters around. It has appeared in almost every single Monster Hunter game in the series, and is consistently one of the least used weapons in every game it appears in. In Monster Hunter Rise, the weapon underwent massive changes. Players of the weapon had some very strong opinions on the changes, were they positive or negative. In this series of videos, I will talk about how the weapon used to function, how it was changed, and how both old and new hunting horn players feel about the changes the weapon went through. In older games, the hunting horn was essentially an offshoot of the hammer, similar to how the gun lance was of the lance. The feature that made the horn stand out was its ability to buff the party by playing songs. This was done by swinging the weapon around. Each attack plays a different note, which is displayed at the top of the screen. You line up note combinations to create a song, and then perform a recital to play it. The songs have different effects that buff you and your party. Each weapon has a different song combination with a variety of different songs. Take this Valstrax hunting horn. It has songs such as attack boost, defense boost, health boost, and even wind resistance. These buffs would be really helpful against a tough monster like Kushala Daora, who likes to spam wind pressure on hunters. Let's take a look at the Tigrex hunting horn, which can provide buffs as attack boost, heat and cold resistance, as well as high grade earplugs. Perfect for fighting a monster like Tigrex, who hangs out in many different environments and is capable of deafening roars. Each weapon having a different song list means that a dedicated hunting horn player, and by extension their party, can be prepared for almost any situation. Over the years, some have called the hunting horn a quote-unquote support weapon. Hunting horn mains have taken offense at this term. Why? Well, I guess the term support weapon makes them think of JRPG classes, where the support class generally exists to buff the party and doesn't do much damage. In terms of the horn, this honestly couldn't be further from the truth. It's an absolute powerhouse in the hands of somebody who has mastered it. And that's the thing, this weapon can be pretty hard to master. Smacking monsters around is simple enough. Lining up songs and playing them is also pretty simple, but doing both at the same time is surprisingly difficult if you don't know what you're doing. The horn has a pretty high skill floor, because while playing the weapon, you must be aware of which songs you want to play, and that means you have to know which specific attacks you need to perform in order to line them up. You can't simply go unga bunga on the monster until they die, you must plan out your songs in advance. And then, you have to find an opportunity to play the song. When performing a recital, you're stuck in one place and therefore completely vulnerable to monster attacks. Skilled horn players would be able to find an opening and play the song on the spot, while novice horn users would probably have to run away from the monster to play safely. Some players even developed a reputation for being quote-unquote corner horners, where they would camp at the edge of combat zones and play songs without attacking the monster. This is usually because they didn't have the skill to perform recitals while not getting hit. The weapon had another mechanic where upon doing a recital, you could press the recital button again to perform an attack and extend the song while repositioning. This was known as an encore. It gave you a chance to evade potential monster attacks, gain even better buffs from the song, or even skillfully knock out the monster, as the encore animation depended entirely on what input you pressed on the analog stick. The skill ceiling of this weapon is really high. Iceborne Hunting Horn took things further, allowing you to store 3 songs in a queue and play any one of them with certain button combinations. And when performing a recital, you could also chain these songs together to activate multiple buffs for the party at once. The skill ceiling of this weapon was raised even higher. Another great thing World did was display the song list at the top of the screen, so you didn't have to remember the songs in advance, which was a great step in making the weapon more accessible. As for me personally, I always had trouble with the weapon. I'm a guy who likes to switch between weapons a lot, and I like having many different types of each weapon. For the horn, I felt like having to know each song for each weapon was a bit too much effort, and I felt like I could get a simpler experience by using a hammer. It seems like the player base agreed with me, because hunting horn has consistently been among the least used weapons across the series. Monster Hunter Rise was announced in September 2020, and they started revealing more and more information in the months leading up to the game's release. According to developer interviews, the director, Yasunori Ichinose, said he was making several readjustments to the hunting horn. Ichinose is a hunting horn main, so it seemed like he had a firm grasp of what people liked about the weapon and what needed to be changed in order to make it better. Weapon previews started dropping around December time, and for the first time we finally witnessed a new hunting horn. reactions were almost overwhelmingly positive. Eventually, the demo released in January, and we finally got to experience it. The weapon is extremely different. Each horn has 4 songs at maximum, and they are heavily simplified. Each song is simply the same note repeated. Recitals are gone, as songs are performed automatically the moment you get a song lined up. If you line up one of each note, you get to perform a special attack known as the Magnificent Trio, which activates the effects of all songs. If you keep attacking, you fill up a gauge that, when full, lets you perform an attack called the Infernal Melody, which buffs your attack power for around 30 seconds. The weapon attacks are overall much faster, and combo together way more. Rise Hunting Horn, or New Hunting Horn as I call it throughout the video, is basically a much more combo-centric hammer that can give buffs. There is no need to learn each song, as they have all been reduced to simply pressing a button twice. There is no need to learn the best openings to perform recitals, as the songs play automatically. Encores are also completely gone. The skill floor has been reduced massively, but arguably so has the skill ceiling. One of the available switch skills for the Hunting Horn is Echo Mode. The description reads, "Press ZR to play all melody effects built up on the music staff." Wait a minute, this sounds a bit like old Hunting Horn, where you build up notes and perform via a recital. Was Mr. Ichinose thinking about the fans of the old Hunting Horn who may have been turned off at the drastic changes? Has he implemented the switch skill so they can enjoy their weapon the way it used to be? No, not really. This time, songs are 1 note each, and doing a recital just plays them all at once. So essentially it's trying to mimic old Hunting Horn, but it's still very simplified. To an extent, it's even more simple than the regular mode. The end result is that the weapon is just completely changed. It's hardly even the same weapon. This is the biggest overhaul a weapon has ever gone through. While other weapons throughout the series have received changes that have changed the way the weapon is played, the original playstyle is usually still present. A good example of this is the Greatsword. Back in the day, the strategy for this weapon was to circle the monster until you saw an attack opportunity. From there you would perform a charge attack, roll, sheath and repeat. World introduced the tackle, which is basically a counter. It lets the Greatsword power through attacks and skip charge levels. So now the best way to play the Greatsword involves tanking hits by tackling your way through attacks, and then making use of the brief openings to land a true charge slash. The key difference is that with the Greatsword, there is nothing stopping a hunter from doing the old strategy of hitting and rolling away. It's still pretty viable. With the Hunting Horn, the original way of playing the weapon is just gone. How did the player base react? Well, for starters, Hunting Horn was the 3rd most played weapon in the demo, and it placed the highest in the speedrun charts. A few months after the full game was released, Capcom released a chart showing the most to least used weapons in the game. Hunting Horn came 9th. This sounds bad until you realise that 1. This is the highest Hunting Horn has ever placed in all the sources I could find. 2. It beats out weapons like Hammer and Insect Glaive, which is a series first. So the changes made to the Hunting Horn definitely helped make it more popular, but at the cost of completely changing the weapon's identity. This information is useful, but it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. We can see that people are playing the weapon, but we don't know how these people feel about the changes. Do they like them? Do they hate them? I wanted more information. I wanted a deeper insight into how Hunting Horn players, as well as the wider Monster Hunter community, felt about these changes. So I published a survey. The survey had 6 questions, and it was designed to see if the Hunting Horn had retained, gained, or lost fans. I received many different responses, and the remainder of this video will be spent discussing the results of the survey. Let's talk about the circumstances behind the survey. The requirements are that you must have tried the Hunting Horn in any game before Rise, and that you must have tried the Horn in Rise. This will allow us to see the thoughts of people who have played both weapons, and as such would be able to explain what they like or dislike about each iteration. I specifically used the word tried rather than mained, because this would open up the survey to those who might not have previously mained the weapon in older games, or didn't like the weapon in Rise. The final sample size before the survey was closed is 321 total responses. I will be completely honest, while it does give us a pretty decent insight into how people feel about the Hunting Horn, it is not entirely big enough to draw a major conclusion, especially in terms of a game that has sold around 7 million copies. That being said, I myself am very satisfied with the results. It's important to know that this is the first survey into this specific topic, and it will paint a very good picture as to how people feel about it. I should explain the results of the survey going question by question. The purpose of this question was to determine how people felt about both iterations of the weapon, Rise Hunting Horn and pre-Rise Hunting Horn. These 4 responses cover all possible ways people could feel about the weapon. Here is a pie chart representing the responses. As we can see from the data, the changes are very polarizing. A good third of the sample size are Hunting Horn fans who did not like the changes. That means these are players who had their favourite weapon eliminated. However, the majority of the sample size are Hunting Horn fans who like both iterations of the weapon, so perhaps the changes are not as extreme as they initially appeared. 14% of the sample size are people who didn't initially like the Hunting Horn, but were sold on the weapon after the changes Rise made to it. An interesting metric, as this means that Ichinose did succeed in gaining new fans of the weapon. However, as we already know, many more people were turned away, so this presents an interesting question. Is it worth changing the core aspects of the gameplay to gain new fans, even if it alienates those who have stuck by for many years? It's worth mentioning that the changes failed to sell 3% of the sample size on the Hunting Horn. They didn't like it then, and they don't like it now. This is a tiny minority of players though. If we were to divide the sample size of people who like versus dislike the new horn, we will find that a solid 62% of the sample size like the Rise Hunting Horn, as opposed to the 38% that dislike it. That is very much a clear majority in favour of the changes. Even if you are to cut the people who disliked old Hunting Horn, it still ends up being 48% versus 35%, which is less of a difference but still very clear. We will return to this question later, so keep this all in mind. What we have seen with Rise Hunting Horn is pretty much a series first. No other weapon has received such a drastic alteration that completely changes the way the weapon is played, while eliminating the original playstyle. Weapons often receive more ways to play them between games, but never has the original playstyle been completely cut. So the purpose of this question was to find out how many people would feel about this happening to other weapons. Included was a picture of the Rise weapon usage chart, so people could have an idea of what weapons were less used than others. Here are the results. This reflects the results of the previous question, where players largely liked the Hunting Horn changes, but these results showed that largely, players would like or be okay with other weapons being changed. 27% of players are against it, although they are outnumbered by the 29% who are simply indifferent. In the context of Rise, Lance and Gun Lance are the least used weapons in the game. It is entirely possible that Capcom could decide to completely change the identities of these weapons too. Their slow, methodical playstyles could be completely abandoned for something faster in an attempt to get more players, and most people seemingly would be okay with it. It certainly relates to the earlier dilemma that was presented. Is it worth changing the core aspect of the gameplay to gain new fans, even if it alienates those who have stuck by it for many years? The reason I conducted this survey was because I wanted a deeper insight into how players felt about the Hunting Horn, and with the data we have received so far, we have a pretty good idea. However, at the end of the day, it's just raw numbers again, like what Capcom published. We need actual opinions that fully tell us what exactly people think of the changes, and what they could mean for other weapons. So as part of the survey, I had follow-up questions where people could leave detailed responses to elaborate on their answers. Usually I try to keep my videos as brief as possible. If I were to try and keep this video brief, I would not be able to discuss as many of the detailed responses as I'd like. So in order to discuss as many as possible, this video will be split into 2. Part 2 of this video will cover the many detailed responses to each question, which will grant us a massive insight into how Monster Hunter fans feel about the changes the Hunting Horn went through. But in addition to this, we will also discuss the conclusion of the study, as well as potential solutions to satisfy everyone. Part 2 will be released very soon from now, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch it. In the meantime, be sure to check out my other videos and please leave a comment too. See you all soon.